Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Turkey and the changing landscape in the Middle East. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was the founder of modern-day Turkey, and now, almost 100 years after serving as the first president of the Republic of Turkey, Atatürk is having a resurrection of sorts. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and it's pronounced, by the way, Erdogan, not Erdogan. It's spelled with a G, but there's a slash, which in Turkish means it's a W. So Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan thinks he's the new Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Erdogan is trying to regain lands and restore Turkey to its greatness. If he has his way, he will restore his country's heritage even further back in history than Atatürk. He revels at the thought of restoring Turkey's influence to the position it held before the current modern period, during the period ultimately of the Ottoman Empire, and even earlier, to the period of the Seljuk Empire. Now, Seleuki, we call it, the medieval Turco-Persian Sunni Muslim empire. Erdogan is expanding Turkey. He's laying claim to territories, waters, and oil rights that include the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkish army has invaded parts of Iraq and Syria. Some of these claims, such as the conflict with Greece, have been covered in the international media. Most others have not. A map recently circulated on Twitter by Metin Kulunk, one of Erdogan's closest political associates, offers proof of Turkey's expansive objectives and territorial claims. On the Erdogan map, Turkey spans areas vast, huge territories, much more than they hold right now. The map includes northern Greece, eastern Aegean Islands, half of Bulgaria, and all of Cyprus, most of Armenia, and large swaths of Georgia, Iraq, and Syria. Erdogan and his vision is to recreate the period of the Turkish Ottoman greatness. It was a great period for Turkish history. The map was originally tweeted on August 26th. The date is significant. It is the anniversary of the Battle of Manzikert. It took place in 1071. It was the battle that led to the eventual defeat of the Holy Roman Empire. The battle was the beginning of the fall of the Holy Roman Empire. It was the start of the emergence of the Ottoman Empire, and the significance of this transitional period in history is best realized in the change of names, because in 1453, Constantinople, the capital of Turkey today, was renamed Istanbul. In Erdogan's worldview, an equivalent of the original Holy Roman Empire exists today. That equivalent is none other than the United States, and her ally, of course, Israel. Erdogan is positioning himself and his country to fill what he sees as an extremely important power gap. He wants to oust today's equivalent of the Holy Roman Empire and occupy that position himself. For Turkey, and for the Turkish President Erdogan, this happens in stages. He is filling a power void left by Iran, as Iran falters on the international stage because of COVID and because of crippling effects of US-led sanctions that they're having on the Iranian economy, which have been crippling. Turkey is stepping in. Erdogan has championed the cause and is taking the place once held by Iran as leader of the bulwark against the West. Just recently, for example, a gas deal was signed between the United States company and Syrian Democratic Forces, a Kurdish group that controls a section of Syria that has significant and untapped oil reserves. Turkey, along with Iran and Russia, mind you, Russia, of course, condemned the agreement. Russia wants those reserves. Turkey has told the United States repeatedly to get out of Syria, declaring that the United States is an outsider. All three countries are condemning and echoed the very same point in condemnation of the United States in their deal. They did not, of course, see the irony that each of these countries also has significant presence in Syria. And recently, just as we've discussed here, Erdogan hosted Hamas leadership in Istanbul. To recap and remind you, during their meeting, as was first reported in the Jerusalem Post, Erdogan gifted Hamas leaders with Turkish citizenship and a prized Turkish passport, knowingly issuing a Turkish passport, a European Union passport, to known and wanted international terrorists is nothing short of sponsoring terrorism. These coveted travel documents will be used to raise money that will unquestionably finance the planning and execution of murderous terror attacks against civilians, of course, in Israel. Erdogan is extremely effective as a leader. He created an Islamic party that ousted the security and military caste that effectively checked the Islamic extremism within Turkey for decades. That was Ataturk's legacy. Over the years, Erdogan has become more and more Islamist and more extremist. The move is apparent in his growing disdain for the West, especially clear in his attitude toward the United States and Israel. Despite serious economic troubles at home, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is a leader on the move, invoking images of the Seljuks and Ataturk, coupled with his unabashed defiance of the United States and Israel, strengthens his position in his own country. Erdogan makes Turks proud of their heritage, proud to be Turkish, proud to be the progeny of once great heroes and warriors. Erdogan's vision is direct conflict with the West. I hope he fails. I think he will fail, by the way. His ideology, while it makes people feel good, has resulted in hard economic times. National economic success is dependent on linkage to the United States and Israel. Iran and Russia cannot and will not pick up the slack. Thus far, Erdogan's ideology, not his economic interests, has led his decision-making process. But it will only take him so far. In the end, success is all about economics. I've also been thinking about Iran and the internet. None of us can imagine life without the internet. Neither can we imagine a government that would shut down or censor the internet. We're all the lucky ones, that's for sure. Not so for Iranians. Average Iranians crave the internet, especially young Iranians. But their government, together with the governments of China and North Korea, censor and block and even totally shutter the internet when it suits their needs, especially when they wish to quell protests or to make certain that their people live in both literal and figurative darkness. Religious leadership in Iran has clamped down on the internet. They filter everything, especially social media. They even block game sites, computer game sites, the kinds of things that you just saw the kids playing on. They're not very dangerous. But what happens is, and last November, in 2019, they shut down the entire internet for an entire week. It was a total internet blackout, brought about because Iranians staged a protest across the country. Locals took to the streets. They stopped traffic. Literally, they blocked their cars perpendicular against the highways and caused long backups. Protests stretched across hundreds of cities around the country. The stimulus for the protests was a staggering increase, a 200% increase in the price of gasoline. The demand was a change in religious leadership. Their language of communication was the internet. So when communication was cut off, the protests disappeared. As much as 95% of the internet in Iran is blocked by the government. Not surprisingly, the Grand Ayatollah, the president, as well as the foreign minister, all from Iran, all have active Twitter accounts in both Persian and English. What is illegal for everyone else in Iran is perfectly suitable for them for their propaganda to the West. Iranian leadership claims that the content that can be found via the internet is a violation of their religious principles. They're up in arms about pornography, but while porn certainly occupies a large wedge of the internet content, it is not the only internet offering. The real reason Iranian leadership fears the internet is the easy access it offers to information and freedom, the ability to communicate from one to the other. Oppressive regimes, all oppressive regimes, detest freedom of information, detest real content. The internet is king of content. That's what makes it so enticing for users. It is news and analysis. It is history and politics. It is all about communication. The internet is everything Iran and China and North Korea detest. They detest the internet because they fear the internet, because the World Wide Web is bigger than they are. The way most young Iranians get around their regime's blocking of the access of social media and other sites is through virtual personal networks, what are called VPNs. A VPN, in a VPN, you ghost your location. So you may be sitting on a computer in Tehran, but VPN shows that you're actually in Los Angeles, London, Lisbon, or any other L city. The biggest obstacle users in Iran face with any VPN is that they need to first get on Iranian local servers in order to ghost themselves and click onto the VPN. And if the local server goes down, so do they. Back to square one. They wait in line, get back on. It's worth the wait. Users rely on VPNs because when an Iranian user uses a VPN, the government filters do not work. United States tech companies are trying to help local Iranian access and to allow their beloved and great need of the internet. Several VPN providers have begun giving 10 gigs for free on VPNs. That's 800 hours of surfing to any Iranian. They also are persuading other VPN providers to offer the same free service to Iranians. VPN providers have worked towards finding ways to alleviate the pressure felt on Iranians and to work around the restrictions imposed on them by the government through the internet. They've created a way to get onto the internet without using an Iranian host, which they are gifting to Iranian internet users. This move is a deal changer. Why? Because access to an unfiltered internet might possibly bring about the fall of the religious regime in Iran. But remember, this is Iran. They are ending around, not simply any other country. Everything comes with great risks. Authoritative extremists, quick to mete out punishment. Iranian leadership is keenly aware of the internet and the VPNs. So they continue relentlessly to disrupt service in order to stop communication. The frustration felt by Iranian users is a bonus enjoyed by Iranian leaders. The regime brutally punishes those behind the protests and those who skirt the censor to organize protests. That's a fact, not an assumption. Amnesty International released a report stating that following the November 2019 protests, many of those thought to be involved in the protest have been arrested and tortured and sexually abused. Iranian security services were sent out to crush the protests. Those who were supposed to defend the right of citizens against abuse were, of course, silent. They are part of the oppressive system, and the report makes note of that. The Amnesty report was disturbing, but not surprising. Iran is a human right abuser, on par with China and North Korea. There will be change in Iran, but it will take some time and lives will be lost. It might sound hokey, but freedom always wins over oppressive governments. They cannot last. There is no doubt in my mind that ultimately, and even ironically, the internet will play a significant role in the overthrow of an oppressive regime in Iran. We need to remember what kind of country Iran is and what Iran stands for, and we need to remember the people that the government of Iran oppresses. Coming up next, points of view. I want to discuss two columns today, one from each side of the aisle, because we have to be even-handed. The focus of both columns is on Jewish voting. The first comes from the Washington Post and asserts that Jews will not leave the Democratic Party. The second is from JTA, the Jewish Telegraph Service, and explains why Orthodox Jews vote for Trump. The Washington Post column is written by Michael Tesler, who teaches at University of California at Irvine. It's entitled, Sorry, President Trump, Here's Why American Jews Aren't Abandoning the Democratic Party. Subtitle of the article, because it's online, these three factors mean a Jexodus is unlikely anytime soon. Jexodus means the Jews leaving the Democratic Party. Tesla articulates the reasons why Jews vote Democrat and why there is no reason to think anything has changed. Here's how Tesla begins. President Trump has recently encouraged Jewish Americans to eschew their long-standing affiliation with the Democratic Party, a movement he and others refer to as Jexodus. He tweeted out claims that Jews are now leaving the Democrats over the party's position on Israel. The president then cited his administration's pro-Israeli policies of withdrawing from the Iranian nuclear accords and moving the U.S. embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem as reasons Jewish Americans should switch to the Republican Party. Tesler continues and explains, here's the background. American Jews have consistently identified with the Democratic Party over the Republican Party by a 2-to-1 margin in Pew Research Center surveys conducted from 1994 to 2018. In fact, Democrats appeared to increase their electoral advantage among American Jews in the 2018 midterm elections. Tesler gives 3 reasons. 1, American Jews are more divided over Israel than Trump thinks. 2, American Jews have liberal views about immigration. And 3, most American Jews of all ages strongly disapprove of Trump. All 3 reasons are correct. Now Tesler concludes his argument. Of course, it's not surprising that an anti-immigrant president who proposed banning a religious minority from entering the country and has a long history of trafficking in anti-Semitic stereotypes would be unpopular with Jewish Americans. It is surprising, though, that the Jexodus movement thinks American Jews will overlook that and join Trump's Republican Party because of its pro-Israel policies. There's no doubt in my mind that this is how Trump is perceived by the majority of Jewish voters. And so Tesler is correct. An overwhelming number of Jews will vote Democrat now, in the past, of course, and certainly in the future. Next up is a column from the JTA. It's penned by Benjamin Rose, who explains why Orthodox Jews will vote for Trump. And this is an important distinction, a counterbalance to the other column by Tesler. Rose begins by writing, only 6% of voters who cast ballots for Barack Obama in 2008 voted for Donald Trump 8 years later in 2016. I'm one of them. Rose continues, political affiliation played no role in my decision. I'm a registered Democrat who often votes Republican. I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family in North Jersey. We cried when Richard Nixon defeated Hubert Humphrey in 1968 and exulted when Ronald Reagan routed Jimmy Carter in 1980. Rose now explains that Orthodox Jews are afraid. They fear, for simple issues of safety and security, what is termed law and order in the Trump campaign. He also speaks, this is Rose, speaks to the issue of Jerusalem and mentions the president's son and son-in-law and daughter and their Jewish background and affiliations. About law and order, Rose writes, American Orthodox Jewish voters are concentrated in and around major cities, where Jewish institutions have spent millions of dollars since 9/11 on security upgrades. We have watched in dread as this summer's legitimate demonstrations against police brutality against Black Americans quickly gave way to rioting and looting, with big city mayors looking the other way. Jewish businesses were targeted at a time when Orthodox Jews, with their unique dress, are already on edge, having been singled out for beatings and assaults in increasing numbers in recent years. Rose concludes that Orthodox Jews will vote for Trump because he is defending their values. He writes, in the final analysis among America's Orthodox Jews, a primary fear propelling support for Trump is the rise of the progressive left. Many Orthodox Jews are pessimistic about the future of their cities and the country as a whole, should the progressive agenda be enacted, with its very real potential to transform America into a much more hostile place for religion. They see Trump as a defender of the values they hold dear. For them, a vote for Trump in November is a vote to keep the Orthodox Jewish lifestyle viable in the United States. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I'm going to show you 3 cartoons today. Hopefully all 3 will make you laugh. They all deal with the strange new reality we live in. First, a mother welcomes her son back from school and takes off his mask, saying, "This isn't the mask you wore to school this morning." The son responds, "No, this one is way cooler. I traded with Taylor, who traded with Hunter." Yes, That is what school is like, what lower school is all about. Trading masks makes sense for kids, just like trading baseball cards and snacks. Next up is a comic by Mark Parisi. This cartoon is a little old, but it really hits the target. A man has just thrown a stick, and his dog is supposed to fetch it. The dog is looking at his tablet GPS. The man says, "Oh, come on. The stick is right over there." Very, very funny. Our reliance on GPS is unparalleled. We never thought we would be relying so much on GPS in ways. Finally, a man is face to face with a rotary fan and his mouth is wide open. The caption reads, 7-year-old kids today, iPhones, iPads, AirPods. And then me when I was 7. That's right. Face right in the fan, mouth open. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Times are really changing. At the ceremony in the White House, Serbia and Kosovo agreed to normalize economic ties between the two countries themselves. And in the middle of all of that signing ceremony, both Serbia and Kosovo agreed to establish embassies in Jerusalem. Jerusalem. Kosovo will be the first majority Muslim country to open an embassy in Jerusalem. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu made an announcement soon after the DC ceremony saying that Kosovo will be the first country with a Muslim majority to open an embassy in Jerusalem. As I've said in recent days, the circle of peace and recognition of Israel is expanding, and more countries are expected to join. These are powerful moments in history. We have to take note of them. But not everyone is pleased by this. Turkey expressed disappointment. The Palestinian leadership said that they would cut ties with countries that open embassies in Jerusalem or establish ties with Israel. To date, only the United States and Guatemala have opened embassies in Jerusalem. We're seeing a huge increase in COVID cases in Jordan, which until now has had the virus totally under control and contained. In one day, 73 new cases of COVID were reported in Jordan. That is the highest number of daily cases since the pandemic started. Before that, Jordan had only 15 deaths, period, and 1,966 positives since March. So the number 73 is a significant one. Unless they control this contagion quickly, the numbers could exponentially increase daily. Jordan instituted nightly curfews from the very beginning, from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Their previous curfew was at 1 a.m., so they made the curfew even longer now. Jordan has also cracked down on movement. Borders are closed, Jordanian authorities even preventing people from traveling from city to city. These are not draconian measures, they're life-saving measures. Jordan was successful in keeping people in place, which kept down the transmission of the virus. They need to make that happen again. For years, Iran has insisted that they hate Israel, not Jews. Get the distinction? They're anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. But this is what the Supreme Leader, the Grand Ayatollah, had to say about Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of President Trump. Quote, the UAE, along with Israelis and evil Americans, like the Jewish member of Trump's family, are working together against the interests of the Islamic world. I hope the Emiratis wake up and pay for what they did. Khamenei was, of course, referring to Donald Trump's very trusted advisor, who just happens to also be his Jewish son-in-law. This just proves what we already surmised. The Iranian rhetoric about merely being anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitic, is simply a veneer maintained to hide their deep-rooted hatred of all Jews, not just those who live in Israel. The Supreme Leader's comments were broadcast on Iranian TV. They included a tongue lashing of the United Arab Emirates. It said, or he said, quote, of course, the UAE's betrayal will not last long, but this stigma will always be remembered. They allowed the Zionist regime to enter the region and forgot Palestine. The Emiratis will be disgraced forever, unquote. Israel and the United Arab Emirates united in order to confront Iran. Iran was never a friend of the Gulf nation or of any Arab nation. That is now abundantly clear. They only pretended to be. Iranian leadership told lies of convenience. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information.
Here is management's newest and most powerful instrument for business. Output of essential results may be written on magnetic tape.
You know that we speak a lot about computers. It's hard to imagine that our phones are not really phones. You know that, right? Our phones are actually supercomputers, much stronger than the computers we actually use on our desks. I remember the days of computer programming with punch cards and mainframes, Fortran. It took hundreds and then thousands of cards for the mainframe to do a program for a project. Then we moved to floppy disks, remember those? And then there were smaller disks. We used computers to replace the typewriter. Remember that period? It was a word processor and then the computer. The first mainframe in Israel was at the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot. It was larger than most people's homes. It was huge. It was called the Golem. The Golem was a magical being that the Maharal of Prague created from the water and the dirt, the clay, near the Vatlava River in Prague. He inscribed the name of God on his forehead. They say it was simply the letters Aleph Mem Taf, which is Emet, meaning truth. But any Kabbalist worth their weight argues that it was either the 72-letter name of God or the 36-letter name of God. That's a name with power. The Golem patrolled the ghetto of Prague, protecting Jews from attack. The Golem was the foundation for Shelley's masterpiece, Frankenstein. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.